At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
And welcome to the Author Brand Show. I'm your host, Doug Crow. I've got a fascinating guest on our show today. He's the founder and CEO of Aqueous Technologies. Now, don't get bored with this, but they build assembly equipment for the electronics industry. Why is that important to you? Because this man is an entrepreneur. He wrote an amazing book about being an entrepreneur, and he's actually been teaching it at places like Dartmouth College. So without further ado, Mr. Mike Konrad. Mike, how are you?
I'm well, Doug. How are you? Good to see you.
Konrad with a K.
Konrad with a K. Yes.
That's the way it was originally, or did you do that just for branding or what? That's interesting.
No. My father, both my parents were immigrants to the United States.
Okay.
My father was Polish and my mother Scottish. And in Poland, Konrad is, spelled with a K because it goes ka, so it's a uniquely English thing to use C for those hard consonant sounds.
Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Well, we're gonna talk about your book in a moment. Before we do, I'd love to hear about your entrepreneurial journey because you started out as a young lad. That's using some Scottish brogue there.
There you go.
As a young lad in your 20s, and now building assembly things for electronics. I remember our previous call, it was in-depth, cool technical stuff. But I want to talk about those C's, how you got started as an entrepreneur.
Well, I refer to myself as a reluctant entrepreneur. No part of me, Doug, wanted to start my own business.
That's right.
I was working for a manufacturer of assembly equipment for the electronics manufacturing industry. And I started there in 1985, 40 years ago. And in 1989, we built soldering equipment, machines that would solder circuit boards, components to circuit boards. And in 1989, there was a treaty signed by the United States and 10 other countries, referred to as the Montreal Protocol, because it was signed in Montreal. And this treaty recognized that the ozone layer was thinning over the poles, and alarmingly so. And scientists determined that there were two primary causes for this thinning of the ozone. And ozone, for your listeners and viewers, is the material in the upper atmosphere that filters out harmful UV radiation, or most harmful UV radiation. And without that ozone layer, we would all walk outside and instantly get cancer. So ozone layer is important. And the scientists determined that there were two primary causes. One was methane, and the number one source of methane was cow flatulence. Okay.
And termites.
Yes. So there you go. Not much we can do about those, right?
No, but I remember seeing that, like they talked about termite farts on this thing I read. I'm like, okay, I got to know more about this.
I know, right? And we thought termites only ate our homes, right?
Right. Now there's so many of them that actually affects our atmosphere. Crazy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And cows, the other part of it. And the other was a chemical known as a CFC, chlorofluorocarbon.
Right. That's right.
And in those days, all circuit boards were cleaned after soldering, because soldering is a messy process. It uses flux and other bad things. And that residue has to come off to make the assemblies reliable. And they were cleaned in pretty much CFC-based chemicals. And in 1989, this treaty that the U.S. entered into, and eventually every UN member nation ratified the treaty. Every UN.
Right.
There's only been two treaties ratified in the history of the UN.
Wow.
There's only been two treaties ratified by every UN member nation. One was the Geneva Convention, which is kind of the rules of war, and the Montreal Protocol. Who would have thought, right? An environmental treaty.
And that also related to air conditioning, yes?
Same.
Yeah.
It uses,
chlorofluorocarbons.
ironically, it uses one of the same chemicals.
Right.
One of the chemicals that we used in our industry was what's called 1,1,1-trichloroethane, which was a CFC, and the other was Freon. Freon is also a refrigerant. Also, remember back in the day, Doug, when you and I were younger, you would go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac in a styrofoam package?
Yeah, that's
no
right.
No styrofoam anymore because
they use CFCs to make those things too.
Right. And the alternative was too expensive, so they made it out of paper. But anyway, we realized that the cleaning methods that we were using in our industry at the time were going to go away. The treaty called for a 10-year phase out, and it would be like, Doug, it would be like a treaty being signed that says in 10 years no more oil can be used.
Yeah, so it was used everywhere, right?
Major, right? It was major, and in fact, no one really took it seriously because they figured it's not going to last. You can't just ban this whole category of chemical, but they did, and those cleaning solvents went away.
Yep.
And at the same time, this startup business that I was working in wasn't mine. I was just an employee, but it was a startup, and the soldering technology that we had come out with, which was novel, was soon to be obsolete because of changes in the types of components that were being used. The new types of components that were being used in circuit assembly were not compatible with this type of soldering machine. So I saw the writing on the wall. And at the same time, I saw this government legislation, this treaty, that was going to change the way boards were going to be cleaned. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity here. So I designed a machine that would clean using, in layman's terms, very simple layman's terms, water and soap, but exotic soap.
Revolutionary, huh?
It was revolutionary, and I didn't actually come up with the idea. Another company was doing it, but they weren't doing it very well. They were doing it kind of clumsily and dorky, and they basically modified a dishwasher and didn't modify it very well. But they were onto something. So I'm like, we should grab that ball and run with it. And they're onto something, but they're just not executing it well. So I pitched the idea to my employer, and he said no. And, what do you do? I sweeten the pot. So I said, look, I feel so strongly about this technology. I'll design it, my time, my money, my risk, and I'll bring you a completed project if I do complete it, and see what happens. And he liked that idea.
Because no investment on his part.
No investment. The only rule was I couldn't spend 1 minute of company time on it. I'm like, okay, fair enough. So
But did they own your brain? Is it? I mean, I get ahead of myself here on the IP part, but
it lived in my brain, but I couldn't see any reason why it wouldn't work. It just needed to be well executed. So I worked with a childhood friend of mine who was pretty clever, and he and I designed this product, and we built a prototype. And about 6 months later, I brought it to my employer and debuted it and demoed it, and it worked well beyond our expectations. It worked very well. And so now I had a dilemma. I was building these machines at night and on weekends and selling them during the day, and I couldn't keep up.
And give me a little bit of I'm a manufacturing nerd a little bit because I like wood shop and stuff. How big is this machine? What did it sell for?
Well, in those days, way different than today. In those days, the machine was about 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. It was basically a cube. And it had a dishwasher shell. We bought a whole dishwasher and stripped out all the parts and just kept the shell.
Love it.
And then put computers in it, embedded controllers, and upgraded the pumps, and did everything we needed to do to make it actually work. So it was like a larger box with a dishwasher in it, and it had a nice little vacuum fluorescent display screen and a printer and stuff like that. It was sexy in an engineering kind of way, and I just we couldn't keep up with production because I had a day job. And
you're making them one at a time, right? There's no assembly line or.
Oh no! These were one at a time.
I'm sorry. What was the price point on them again, Mike? How much would they cost?
About $5,000.
Okay.
About $5,000. And at some point, it became very clear I can't do both. And again, no part of me wanted to own my own business. And I was quite naive in my 20s and thought that, well, if my company does well, I'll do well. Because everything flows right down, right?
Sure, yeah.
Always.
Yeah,
and so I made an offer. Again, I wasn't really, I didn't have a strong business acumen back then. And so I said, look, I'll sell it to you from my out-of-pocket. I was out around $15,000.
In what? In your tooling or?
Well, it was mostly inventory and R&D costs. I had to buy
Okay.
several
So
dishwashers
you had
and
more sales than manufacturing capacity,
yeah.
and you're going to sell for 15 grand, and they said,
And they said, "Yeah, hold on," and he had his secretary type up a very rudimentary contract,
yeah,
and I signed it over to him, and I got a check that day for $15,000. He couldn't do that fast enough, and I thought, okay, this is great. This is great because at the same time, our manufacturing at the company that I was working for was going down because the soldering equipment was by that time very obsolete,
Yeah.
and we weren't selling very many machines. We had this factory and the staff that didn't have a lot to do, and I was like a one-armed paper hanger, at night and on weekends. So I'm like, well, this is the perfect solution. So I did that. And then I had this false high expectation that I was going to be king of the forest at that point. I saved the company, at least according to my ego.
You didn't like look for a patent or anything on this thing? It was just
Oh,
a
no. No,
machinery?
I'm not
Okay.
again, this is the world according to Mike.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of patents. There's certain IP that patents are absolutely required. I'm
Gotcha,
not
yeah.
dismissing the idea of a patent,
Yeah.
the importance
You're
of a
just
patent.
putting
But in
things
my
together.
case,
Yeah.
it was, we just modified a dishwasher, right?
Yeah, I gotcha.
We were, I don't know how much would be patentable. And then patents are really only as good as the money you have to defend them.
Yes.
And that could cost way more than the patent. And so, my thought was first to market, build it well.
Yep.
If other
I love
people
that.
come along, fine. Welcome to the party. So I didn't have the money for a patent, and I didn't have, I didn't really
Yeah.
believe strongly in patents in this
And
case.
as a business point, I want to make to the audience, that's a really powerful thing what you just said. It's a cool, restructuring of existing components. That idea might be patentable, but being first to market and leaning into it is more important than trying to raise money to defend it. It's defensive versus offensive, I think, and it's a real good lesson for entrepreneurs to get going and serve your clients first. Thank you.
Right,
Yeah.
and I'm no lawyer, but my understanding of patent law is that even though I didn't have a patent, what I created was still what they would consider in that business as prior art, meaning this already exists. It's already in commercial trade, which means someone else can't patent it and stop us from building it because we've been building it, right? They may not be able to get it patented because it's already in existence. It's prior art, but they could copy everything we do. We can't stop them from doing that. And I didn't care about that. So, in fact, I welcomed it because we were doing something quite revolutionary. And when you're the only one doing something, there's a lot of skepticism, from the community. If this is so great, why isn't everyone else doing it, right?
Exactly.
And that's a valid
It's because I'm smart.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't carry a lot of weight, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Except in my head. So we had a product meeting coming up where we were going to come up with the next products over the next couple of years for the company. And I thought I would be carried in on a chariot and fanned with, giant grape leaves. And my next idea was to make this next generation of machine more environmentally sound. We're not using CFCs, so we're not destroying the ozone, but we're still putting stuff down the drain. And at some point, someone's going to ask questions about what's going down the drain.
Yeah.
And I had an idea to make it completely zero discharge, closed loop.
Ultrasonic or what? What would be the?
No, spray and air. But I had an idea on how to recycle everything so that
Gotcha. Okay.
everything's either reused or
Nice.
regenerated and all that.
Love it.
And I thought, well, of course we'll do that, right? It's a continuation. It's the next evolution of this product that's
2.0,
doing well.
right?
And there was an alternate idea put up by the owner's son, which could tell you something right there. And so I had what I thought were there were two ideas on the table. My idea, which I considered the smart idea, and the owner's son's idea, which I considered the stupid idea. So clearly, he's going to go for my idea. Clearly, he did not.
What was the other idea? I'm curious. One's recycling stuff. What was his?
Oh, I don't even remember what it was.
Okay.
I think I just discounted it. It was something completely different in as part of the assembly process.
Got it. Okay.
A soldering technique of some sort, but it was still going to be obsolete in my mind. So I thought for sure I had this one nailed, and And then I started arguing with my boss that, this is the wrong decision. And I kept putting up the argument. And then he said to me one word, Doug, one word that started my company. It started with F. It contained 4 letters, and it wasn't the word that you're thinking. I said, I think you're making a mistake.
Uh-huh.
And he said, fine. Fine. Like dismissive, F you, fine. And it might as well have just been an F-bomb. Because,
yeah, right. Yeah.
And at that very moment, I realized that no matter what I did in the past, didn't matter, didn't carry any weight. Mm-hmm. I had no credibility. And at that very instant, my company was born here in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, all right, you're the boss, right? So I resigned myself. I didn't resign the company.
How much time between that conversation and resignation?
About a year.
Okay.
So
And that's fair. People think like these dramatic Hollywood stories where I march at the door like, I need a year to get my crap together. I mean,
no, I needed the money. I couldn't afford to leave my job. And we were young, and we had a family, and we had a mortgage, and so I couldn't just do what every part of me wanted to do.
Right, but I want to know what went on during that year, both here and tactically, what you did to get ready.
Well, I went home and converted my garage into a mad scientist studio, and started designing the next generation of machine, the one that my boss was not interested in. Yeah. And, I built a prototype and then a pre-production model and ran a bunch of tests. And about a year later, maybe it was about 10 months, but right around there, I realized that, okay, I've got something that works. I have proof of concept. And then I started thinking that, how long should I stay here? And there were 2 things that were driving that question. One was, from a practical standpoint, like, I'm not going to do this unless I leave at some, I have to leave at some point. And the other was an ethical dilemma. Like, I'm sitting here, selling the older version of the machine, not talking about what's coming down the pike. At some point, I probably need to leave, because at some point I might be violating some at least ethical concerns.
Yeah. To those customers who are buying the dirty machines, I'll call them. Yeah.
Right. So when I thought, okay, I really can't do any more undercover. I need to come out of the closet, so to speak, and announce what I'm doing. I wrote a resignation letter, and I had been there 7 years at that point. So I wrote a resignation letter, and I put in the letter exactly what my plans were, that I plan to pursue another continuing technology.
And how old were you, and how much runway did you have as an entrepreneur? This is really important to know.
Well, I was at that point, by the time I resigned, I was 29.
Okay.
No, I was 31. I was 31 by that point. And I had like no runway. I had zero runway. In terms of finances, I had zero runway. But that wasn't my concern at that point. I just took things in small bites, and I couldn't think that far ahead. Again, I was not a business person. I'm not an entrepreneur. So I gave my notice. I put on the notice that my intent, if I am successful in my endeavor, then I may be a competitor. And in light of that, I'm offering to leave right now, if you think that is appropriate. But otherwise, I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice. But I do want you to know that I may end up being a competitor, so I don't want to be here and not tell you that. And
very honorable.
Yeah, I thought so. Well, it turned out to be a savvy move later from when we got sued. That's another story. And he wrote on my, he asked me to stay for a month, so clearly he didn't take me too seriously. Yeah. And then he wrote on my last day, when I asked him to sign the resignation notice and give me a copy of it, he wrote, "Good luck, but not too much luck." I'm like, okay, that was cute. So I left, and on my way home, I stopped by a business park near my house, a little multi-tenant business park, and leased a little 1,200 square foot place. And that was my company headquarters.
Before you go on, Mike, I want a question for you. How big is the industry for this cleaning of electronic components? How much we talking here, globally and nationally?
Oh gosh, globally, probably several $100 million.
Okay.
It's a niche. It's part.
Yeah.
It's one part of the overall manufacturing. Building
Right.
electronics is extremely complicated.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different parts to building. There's board fabrication, component fabrication.
Yeah. Just
stuff.
what this guy was doing. I'm
cleaning-
asking for a reason because I feel like people says good luck but not too much. He's got a real scarcity mindset of I mean, how many competitors are out there on this thing?
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate. It is quite a niche within the manufacturing
Sure.
space, the electronics manufacturing space.
Yeah.
So there are probably 15 companies globally that provide equipment that does what we do. And in North America, there's probably 5.
Right. Okay. That's about right.
Yeah. So
Okay,
you know,
go on.
it's not crowded. It's not crowded. But then again, there's you're not selling these things on QVC at night to people
Right.
who are
And some of
insomniacs,
these
right?
companies make other machines than just that one, right? You're
Yes,
focusing
we're
on
unique.
one.
We're the only company that only does this.
And that's the one thing that people notice about manufacturing. The big conglomerates, they make dozens or hundreds of different machines. You're focusing on one. So it's
Well, I'm a big
It's
believer in kind of the Jim Collins, the author Jim Collins' Good to Great book, where he looked at pairs of publicly traded companies, and these pairs of companies basically sold the same types of products to the same types of customers.
Right.
And one company did very well, one company did not do very well. And what do the ones that did well have in common? And he determined that there's like 10 attributes that they all shared that they had in common that allowed them to do well. And one of them was do one thing well.
Yep.
And don't be an also-ran. Just if you have one product, that's fine. Just make sure that you can claim legitimately that you really believe this, that it's the best in class.
Right.
And that's how we started. It's like, well, this is all we're going to do. I don't want to do anything else. I didn't even want to do this, right? So, so I started the company and started. I couldn't afford ads, so we ran press releases, which are free, in the local trades.
And did you contact previous customers from your old job, or were we not?
No. Although I was legally allowed to, if I remembered who they were. I'm not allowed to take lists and things like that. That's company property. But I was in that industry for 7 years. I knew a lot of people, and I was kind of the face of the company. I was the person, vice president of sales. So I knew everybody.
Yeah, you knew him.
And
Okay, you knew,
and people knew me. So people started reaching. They heard rumors that I'd started something, and they saw the company name, and they saw my name, and like, oh, I know him. So people were reaching out to me.
Nice.
But as I got on the industry's radar, I also got on my former boss's radar.
Yes.
And he
Let's get to the
wasn't
juicy
impressed.
part of the story here.
So one day, a car pulled up into our parking lot, and someone came in, and the receptionist got me and said, Mike, there's a guy in the lobby who wants to see you. And then he said 3 words, and you can guess what those were.
Served.
You've been served. Yeah. And at first there was fear,
Yeah, of course.
very rapidly replaced by anger. And
What was his premise on the lawsuit?
11 causes of action: breach of contract, breach of fiduciary responsibility, unfair business practices, fraud, and kicking puppies and shooting JFK, and pretty much everything. Fraud. And it turned out, again, I was naive at that point, but it turned out that the fraud element carried mandatory attorney's fees provisions, which means if I lose, not only am I subject to some kind of penalty, but I have to pay their attorney's fees on whatever was allocated for the fraud.
Okay,
charge.
so 11 things. So tell me how you handle this. This is good stuff.
Well,
for
we
people.
after a couple of weeks, I reached out to him and said, "Look, I don't think I did anything wrong, but no part of me wants to see you in court. Can we just work something out, right? And that took a lot for me to do that because my ego was
you're
raging,
pissed off,
right? I was
yeah.
pissed
But
off.
we all know the only people who make money on lawsuits are the attorneys.
The lawyers, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And all the peripheral around them, the stenographers and the expert witnesses and
it's
all
an
that
industry.
stuff, forensic accountants, all this stuff. So he just started laughing and he said, I think I can quote this verbatim. Son, if you think you're ever going to see the light of a courtroom, you're a fool. I'll bankrupt you before you ever get to court. And then I realized quite instantly that his motivation was not to seek justice. His motivation was to shut down an emerging competitor. And, it's a savvy move, right? Okay,
Yeah.
I get it. So
Evil.
So I'm like, okay, we got to fight this. Well, I had, when you talked about runway, you asked me about runway.
Yeah.
I took that as a financial question. Once I left my former employer and started the company, once I had a machine that was ready for the market to see, I'm like, I need money. I don't really have any money. So whatever little I had was used to develop the idea. So I did what you're supposed to do. I went to a bank. I went to a bookstore, sat on the floor of a bookstore, memorized as much of a how to write a business plan book I could find. I couldn't afford the book. Ran home, got on my early word processor, and hammered out a business plan. And I was pretty convinced that a bank would loan me money. It was because it was a good idea. And this is my second time at bat. I had created something successful, even though I didn't have anything to show for it. Yeah. And I took it to a bank, and either out of humor or empathy, I'm not sure which one, the banker said, well, let me bring it in front of the loan committee and we'll get back to you, rather than saying no on the spot. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, I get the Dear John letter. And then I went to 2 other banks, and it was 3 strikes, you're out. Yeah. So then I hit up the one person who was least likely to loan me any money, and that was my father. My father was an immigrant from Poland, and like a lot of immigrants, particularly from
Eastern
kind of impoverished countries, he was extremely frugal. I used to refer to him as the cheapest man on the planet. And I thought, okay, he's going to say no, but I don't know who else to ask. So I made an appointment with my father, and my wife and I went over to the house, and I showed him my business plan, and I was asking for $30,000.
And what year was this?
And that would have been 1992.
92. So yeah, probably like 62 days. Okay.
And he said his answer after I gave him the business plan, he didn't ask a lot of questions, which alarmed me. And then he said something which really scared me. He goes, let me speak with your mother and we'll get back with you. And I remember from childhood, that's always no.
Yeah.
Right? If your mom said, let me speak to your father, or your father said, let me speak to your mother, that was just code for no. I just don't want to tell you no now, right? I don't want to see the tantrum now. So I was full well ready that he'd say no. And after about a week, he summoned my wife and I back to the house, and we went there, and he said, your mother and I have reviewed your business plan, and we don't believe it would be a smart idea to loan you $30,000.
Okay.
And I was about to read my concession speech. And then he said, we don't think that's enough. We're going to loan you $70,000.
And what was the agreement? Was it for interest or equity, or what was the deal for him?
It was basically a line of credit for no equity, 10% interest. Wow. And the interest would not start accruing until we had our first revenue.
What a job.
So I could take some draws on that money to finish development.
Nice.
But the moment we sold our first machine, that's when the 10% interest started. And
that's very
10%
fair.
in those days was cheaper than I could get from a bank.
Oh, yeah.
And it was more money that he could make in a bank.
Yeah.
So it was win-win. I mean, he could have said 150%, and I would have said, fine, we'll do it. Yeah.
So a lot of angel investors do, but this is good, right?
This was great. So this was, he was definitely going to get his money back with interest if everything went well. And I had a source of funds, and I thought 70,000, my God, it might as well be 700 million. It might as well be 7 billion, 7 trillion. I mean, didn't know what $70,000 even looked like, right? And all of a sudden I have access to that. And then a couple of months later, I got sued. And within 6 months, that $70,000 was gone. It was gone.
gosh.
A little bit into the business, and the majority of it, probably 80% of it, went into the lawyers.
Legal fees. Holy crap.
Yeah, and it was gone, 100% gone. So we're selling equipment, and at some point, our money situation was so bad. Now, fortunately, my wife was working. She worked at a bank, and she had a good job. So we were able to pay the mortgage and feed the kid and, all that. But that was it. Our credit cards were, what few credit cards we had were 100% maxed out. And we had just enough money in the bank to cover expenses, but not for the business, just personal expenses. So we weren't starving, but our income did nothing to fuel the business.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? And I remember things were so bad at some point. This is before the internet. Someone called and said, they wanted a brochure. Again, no email. So I went to mail a brochure in a 9x12 envelope, and we had a postage meter. But remember back in the days, the Pitney Bowes postage meters, these big metal tanks that you would have to take to the post office to fill up. Mm-hmm. The postage meter was empty, and I didn't have any money to I think the minimum you could put in the postage meter was $50 or something. So, and I didn't have any money to do the meter. So I scavenged through our garbage cans in the office, and I found a few envelopes that had stamps on them that weren't properly canceled. Sometimes back then, they would hand
I remember
cancel
that.
them.
I have actually steamed off stamps before, so I know what you're
I just cut
talking
them out and taped them on, right?
Yeah, I get it.
As bad as that looked to the customer, that's what I did. So that's when I realized that we're in trouble. And then a few days later, the phone rang, and it was a customer who wanted to order a machine. And I realized that I don't have the money to even buy the parts to build the machine.
Yeah.
And without hesitation, Doug, without any forethought,
Deposit.
I said, yeah, okay, great. We're happy to hear that. Thanks for your confidence in us. Our terms are 50% down, balance on delivery.
Yeah.
And the customer went, are you crazy? You're a new company. My company will never, we don't put down payments. We don't put deposits. No one does that in our industry. And I'm like, well, without arguing, without any pushback, without any resistance, I said, I totally understand. If I were you, I would have the exact same response. In fact,
You're a good salesperson.
Do it. So, but those are our terms. And I apologize if those terms don't fit your needs. I totally understand.
Yeah.
But those are our terms. And that customer reluctantly ordered, as did the next 20 customers.
And that's a lesson that people need. That's a big ballpoint in the transcript below here, folks, because I did the same thing 2 years ago with a major bank in Ohio, or as a customer, and they always pay like 45 days. Like, well, we need a deposit. We don't really do that. I said, well, I do.
Yeah, I mean, terms have to be agreed by both sides, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And fortunately, our people in the industry knew who I was, so I had a good track record. I had a good reputation, and they liked what our machines did, or they thought they did, which they did. And, they wanted the machine more than they wanted their terms. So, they went to bat for us, and we didn't lose a single order.
Great lesson. I love that. Yeah.
And then over time, we start getting, fat, dumb, and stupid, and things are. Another thing Jim Collins wrote in his book, Good to Great, is good is the enemy of great.
Yeah.
And we were doing good. And I was too afraid to make decisions to do things great in case I failed and lost good. Good was predictable. Good was safe. We were very close to the edge of the envelope, but we weren't quite at the edge. We were always at the edge, but it was safe. And I didn't, there was an unpredictability about trying to do great, take it to the next level. So we postponed greatness, or the pursuit of greatness, for the safety of good enough, right?
Wow.
And in that, we started falling victim to more fear-based decisions. And one of them was our customers were, by then we had quite a bit more competition, and they were offering not just terms, but extended terms, net 120 or net 160 or 80 or whatever. And so we would start doing that. And next thing you know, we're selling a lot of stuff, but our cash flow sucked, totally sucked. And we fell back into those fear-based decisions. And one thing I've learned in hindsight is I refer to, in a totally metaphorical way, I refer to the business gods, right? And I don't mean that spiritually. I just mean these business gods that kind of control how we do in business. And the business gods would teach me a lesson, and I would not realize I learned the lesson until later. For example, the terms. When my building was on fire and I had to jump out the window, which was what it felt like, I had no hesitation about designing terms that met our financial needs.
Right.
No hesitation.
Yeah.
And I received very little pushback.
Yeah.
And we got through the worst of times. And then fear set in. We got lazy. We started playing the same game everyone else plays. And next thing you know, we're kind of like an also ran with our terms. And I was afraid to bring back those terms because, well, they'll say no. What if they say no? What if we lose the order? What if they get the order and we don't get the order? But I had forgotten it works. I had forgotten I had already learned that. And then I had to make a conscious decision to do that, to put fear off the table. And I can cite dozens of examples of things I learned before I learned them. I experienced them before I learned them.
Oh my gosh, brilliant! Yes. So let's do this, Mike. I've got like at least 2 or 3 open loops here. Some real good hooks that people want to know how these stories ended, and we're not going to tell them because I'm pretty sure those stories are in somebody's book.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure which book you're talking about. Would it happen to be
I think
this
that
book
one.
right
Yes.
there? Yeah.
Hold it up for a second, a little longer. People can see it, so they can get this thing. A Reluctant Entrepreneur by Michael Konrad. Yeah. Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable.
Well, there you go. There you go. That's the one. I'll give you a little story behind the book. No part of me wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
I keep doing things that I don't want to do, Doug. I don't know. There's a wash, rinse, repeat thing here. I started, my business has been around for 33 years now. So, for those that wondered, did you make it? Well, clearly it's still there, right?
Yeah.
Although I'm kind of semi-retired from the business. I still own the business, but my team runs the company, quite frankly, way better than I ever did. I'm the design guy. I'm the creative person behind all of our products. But I had no interest in actually running a company. I wasn't very good at it. And I didn't want to be good at it, frankly. I just had to be good enough, to not screw it up. And my team, they're less interested. They're not interested, but they're less interested in the creativity side and all that. They're more interested in honing the business and fine-tuning it and standard operating procedures and all the stuff that I found boring. So it's a great synergy of me as the creative force and them as the actually get stuff done force.
Nice.
And get it done well and correctly. So I started several years ago, started speaking at universities mostly and to some business groups about my journey in entrepreneurship. And it not in the spirit of how to do something, but more in the spirit of how not to do something, right?
Equally important, if not more so.
Equally important. I think there's more lessons to learn from negative lessons than positive lessons. But and as I started that speaking tour, I started remembering more. I mean, 33 years, there's a lot of memories there, right? And they get jumbled up, and a lot of them get lost to time and history. And every time I would remember, oh, wait, this is another anecdote. This is another lesson. I'd write it down. And I had a notebook filled with all these anecdotes. And then as I would go through the notebook, it started to have this narrative. So I thought, I'm going to string in the details between these things and for my own benefit. And I found that quite therapeutic and cathartic to be able to write my own business journey history. So I started framing the book out, not really with the intent to publish, but just for my benefit and for my speaking gigs. And so I would remember. And I let a couple of friends read it, and their response was, "You got to publish this." And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Well, who's interested in this stuff? This is boring. This is geeky, boring business stuff." And they said, "No, it's interesting." And so I thought, okay, well, let me rewrite it with the thought of someone else is going to read this other than me.
Yeah.
And I did that for a couple of years, probably a few years. I would write it and I'd stick it on the shelf, and 6 months later or 8 months later, I'd pull it off the shelf. I'd read it again. I went, this part's great. What was I thinking on this part? And I'd rewrite it. And then at some point, I'm like, okay, I got this finished product or near finished product.
Yeah.
What am I going to do with it? So I thought, well, I publish a lot of technical I write monthly columns for some of our industry magazines, and I produce a lot of content. I host podcasts on technical matters and now entrepreneurship, but then it was all technical stuff. I produce a lot of webinars, so I'm prolific in terms of content creation, but I've never published a book. And I thought, well, let's just add that. So I kind of did it just as a challenge to myself, and then eventually published it, and it's just one more thing in the catalog of experiences.
Wonderful.
But I enjoyed every part of writing it, and rewriting it, and rewriting it, and rewriting it, and I enjoy the feedback I get from it, from people I know and people I don't know. Because now all of a sudden I hear from people I've never met who bought the book and all that. So I released the typical 3 versions. I released the paperback, the Kindle version, and the audiobook.
Good.
Which I narrated. Fortunately, I have a studio, with good mic and sound and all that stuff. So I was able to do that. And it was a fun. That was a fun part of my professional career. It was writing the book.
I love that.
Because what do entrepreneurs like to talk about? They like to talk about themselves,
Of course. And your stories are great, though. We could talk for hours, but the show is already over, so we got to wrap it up. And I want to, show that cover one more time so people get it. And the link is below here. It's on Amazon, I'm guessing. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And,
so the link is below here, folks.
The Audible version is on Audible and Amazon, obviously.
Great, yeah. So if you want to hear the rest of the story, you got to get the book. That's why I want to leave these open loops, these hooks for people on the lawsuit and the good to great stuff you're talking about. There's probably a lot more than that in there, so I wanted people to
there's some fun stories. There's one story I'll just tease your audience with where my bookkeeper, at some point in the company history, like most companies will go through at some point, we had an embezzlement thing go down by our bookkeeper, and our bookkeeper ended up going to jail. And when I was kind of arguing with the prosecutor wasn't real interested in pursuing it because it was only $100,000, and they're like, can you just sue her in civil court?
Right.
No. And
above small claims level, come on.
During her tenure with us, I should have noticed. It was pretty obvious. She had a lot of bling. She drove nice cars, and I knew what I was paying her. And she was a single grandmother, and it didn't all add up. But I didn't care. That's her business. And at some point, hopefully you can cut that part out.
It's okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I'm in Southern California. We have a lot of fires around here.
Okay.
And the air is A, very dry, and B, a little smoky. But at some point, she got new implants, new teeth. And I'm guessing I bought those. Yeah. So at one point, the prosecutor asked if I would be willing to kind of maybe take her up on a repayment schedule. And I said, no, I only want 2 things. I want her, A, in jail, and I want her effing teeth. And I said it a little too loud, so the entire courtroom just stopped. The silence was deafening, and they all looked at me like I was Jeffrey Dahmer or something. It's like, okay, no. So I had to explain to the prosecutor what that meant. So
that is hilarious.
That story's in the book and others.
Oh my gosh!
Any entrepreneur
Yeah.
It's like if you go to the VFW, the local Veterans of Foreign Wars
Yes.
Lodge, sit down with some veterans. You're going to hear foxhole stories. You're going to hear great stories. We all have our foxhole stories, business foxhole stories, and they're all tragically humorous stories. You know, you either laugh or you cry, right?
Tragedy plus time equals humor. If
Humor,
there's no time there, it's
100%. It wasn't funny at the time, but 100%.
That's right. So, shameless plug. What was the original title again now?
Yes. So last time you and I spoke, we spoke about a book in progress, and the working title was Shift, S-H-I-F-T. Yeah. And the idea of that title was something we didn't get into here, but it's certainly in the book, is how business owners need to shift their skill sets.
Right.
That what gets you from A to B will typically fail you from B to C, right? And we tend to not want to let go of those early skill sets because they worked. But they stop working. The magic wand stops working. Right. So you need to shift. And then I was saying to you that I consider myself, more as a reluctant entrepreneur. And you went, Mike, that's the name of your book. Yeah. The Reluctant Entrepreneur. That is the name of your book. I think you said something about, it's kind of a mysterious title. It's like, what does he mean by that, right? And it's more intriguing than shift.
The psychology of that, I could break it down for the listeners real quickly, but shift is like, okay, it's a little bit academic. I got to shift something, but the reluctant entrepreneur is kind of visceral. It's got a verb in there, and it's got the actual reader in the title, right? You're an entrepreneur. Are you a reluctant one? No. But wait, this guy is? I'm curious. So it hits two or three psychological points all at once with those two words. So
I think that's exactly what you said to me back then, and I immediately changed the title.
Nice.
So thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Doug. My
pleasure, sir. Yes. My pleasure. We got to wrap it up today because we're going to end the show, but stick around when the recording's over because I want to ask you a couple more questions off camera here. But hey, great show today. Folks, get this book. The links are below here. And if you want to have Mike come and speak, he's also a professional speaker, as you can tell. So, you can reach out to him. Do you want to put your contact information there, Mike, or just
sure.
LinkedIn or whatever you want?
Yeah, no, you can definitely put my contact information.
Okay, terrific. All right. Well, thank you very much, folks. And Mike, as always, pleasure.
Thank you, Doug. Good to see you again.
You bet. That concludes the show for today on the Author Brand Show.